Moses Sithole Part 2. The arrest, the evidence, and the trial. The search was over, but the investigation had only just begun. An arrest raised answers and even more questions, as detectives uncovered evidence that would grow into one of South Africa's largest criminal trials. Stay with us, because the most important discoveries were still waiting to be made. And if you value carefully researched African crime history told with respect for the victims and the evidence, consider subscribing, like this video, and sharing it with others who appreciate documentary storytelling. South Africa. Recap. The man they believed had remained hidden for more than a year was finally about to step into view. But bringing one of South Africa's most wanted suspects into custody would prove anything but straightforward. Today's continuation of these historical events. On the afternoon of 18 October 1995, police officers waited in silence. The location was an industrial property in Benoni, east of Johannesburg. To anyone passing nearby, it appeared to be another ordinary day. Inside the operation, months of investigation had reached a decisive moment. The information received by detectives suggested that the suspect intended to meet his brother-in-law to purchase a firearm. Whether he suspected police involvement remained unknown. Investigators could not assume he would arrive alone. They could not predict whether he was armed, nor could they know how he would react once he realized the meeting had become a police operation. Every officer understood the importance of what was about to happen. The objective was simple: arrest the suspect alive. Protect the public. Preserve every possible piece of evidence. A successful arrest would allow investigators to continue identifying victims, verifying evidence, and presenting the strongest possible case before the courts. Failure could have placed officers and members of the public at serious risk. As the arranged meeting approached, police remained out of sight. Time seemed to slow. Every approaching vehicle demanded attention. Every unfamiliar face prompted another assessment. Then, the man investigators believed they had been searching for arrived. According to official accounts, officers identified themselves and moved to arrest him. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Rather than surrender immediately, the suspect resisted. Investigators later stated that during the confrontation, he attacked one of the officers with an axe. Faced with what police described as an immediate threat, an officer discharged his firearm. The suspect was struck in the leg and abdomen. The confrontation ended almost as quickly as it had begun. Medical personnel were called. The wounded suspect received treatment before being taken into police custody. The investigation that had dominated South African headlines for months had entered an entirely new chapter. For the first time, detectives were no longer searching for an unknown offender. They had a suspect. But an arrest is not a conviction. Investigators still face the task of proving every allegation through evidence that could withstand examination in court. That work had only begun. Over the following days, detectives questioned the suspect while continuing to compare witness statements, forensic evidence, and missing persons investigations. According to investigators and later court proceedings, the suspect made admissions regarding numerous killings. During interviews, he claimed that his actions were motivated by resentment towards women after an earlier rape allegation, which he maintained had been false. It is important to distinguish between explanation and justification here. Criminologists often examine what offenders say about their motives. That does not mean those explanations are accepted as factual or viewed as mitigating their crimes. The courts ultimately assess criminal responsibility on the basis of evidence, not personal claims. Investigators therefore focused on corroboration. Could the information provided by the suspect be independently verified? Did his statements match forensic findings? Did they correspond with witness accounts? Did they identify locations or victims previously unknown to police? These questions guided the investigation far more than the suspect's own explanations. As detectives continued their work, they discovered that solving the case involved far more than obtaining a confession. Each victim had a family. Each family deserved certainty. Every identification required careful forensic examination. Every timeline had to be reconstructed. Every piece of physical evidence had to be documented. The investigation expanded once again. Police reviewed reports from communities across Gauteng. Missing persons files were reopened. Witnesses who had previously believed their information insignificant were interviewed again. Some remembered seeing a man speaking with women near taxi ranks. Others recalled conversations about employment opportunities. Individually, these memories appeared ordinary. Together, they strengthened the broader picture emerging from the investigation. News of the arrests spread rapidly across South Africa. For many families, it brought cautious relief. But relief was accompanied by painful uncertainty. People still did not know whether missing relatives would be found. Some hoped investigators had arrested the wrong person. Others feared the opposite. Communities gathered around radios and newspapers searching for updates. Every announcement carried the possibility of recognition or heartbreak. For detectives, the arrest marked the end of one phase. The search for the suspect was over. The search for the full truth was not. The investigation now shifted from identifying one man to establishing the full extent of the crimes for which he could legally be held responsible. And as prosecutors prepared the evidence, the scale of the case became even more apparent. The charges would continue to grow. The evidence would fill thousands of pages. And the courtroom that awaited would become the setting for one of the largest criminal trials in South African history. An arrest can end a search. It does not end an investigation. In October 1995, detectives now faced a challenge unlike anything they had encountered before. Every statement made by the suspect had to be tested. Every claim had to be supported. Every victim had to be identified through evidence that would withstand the scrutiny of a court of law. Nothing could be assumed. Nothing could be rushed. The investigation entered its most methodical phase. Teams of detectives traveled across Gauteng, reopening files that had once appeared unrelated. Missing person reports were examined again. Crime scene photographs were compared. Witnesses who had spoken to police months earlier were contacted once more. This time, investigators knew what questions to ask. Forensic specialists worked alongside detectives to establish clear links between victims, locations, and timelines. Every confirmed connection strengthened the prosecution's case. Every uncertainty demanded further investigation. The objective was not simply to prove that crimes had occurred. The objective was to demonstrate, beyond reasonable doubt, who had committed them. That standard would determine everything that followed. As evidence accumulated, prosecutors realized the case was becoming one of the most extensive criminal prosecutions in South African history. The number of victims linked to the investigation continued to increase. Each new identification represented more than another statistic. It represented another family waiting for answers, another life interrupted, another future that would never unfold as planned. For investigators, these were not anonymous files. They were people. Many had traveled to Gauteng hoping to build better lives. Many had shared the same determination that defined countless South Africans during the country's democratic transition. Their stories deserved to be documented with dignity. That principle shaped the investigation. While newspapers often focused on the suspect, detectives remained focused on the victims. Who were they? Where had they lived? Who was still waiting for them to come home? Those questions mattered just as much as identifying the offender. As the evidence expanded, prosecutors amended the charges. The case that first appeared before the courts in late 1995 had already been substantial, but it did not remain unchanged. As additional forensic findings, witness testimony, and investigative work connected more victims to the case, the indictment grew. By the time the trial commenced in October 1996, prosecutors had charged the accused with 38 counts of murder, 40 counts of rape, and 6 counts of robbery, reflecting the evidence investigators believed they could prove before the court. The accused entered pleas of not guilty. That decision meant every allegation would have to be examined in open court. Every witness would be questioned. Every forensic report scrutinized. Every investigative conclusion tested. South Africa's justice system now faced an extraordinary case of complexity. Thousands of pages of documentation had been assembled. Investigators had gathered physical evidence from numerous locations. Medical experts prepared reports. Forensic specialists organized exhibits. Witnesses prepared to testify about meetings, conversations, and observations that had seemed insignificant at the time. Together, those fragments formed a detailed reconstruction of events stretching across more than a year. The trial would not rely on a single confession, nor would it depend upon one witness. Instead, prosecutors built a cumulative case. Each piece of evidence reinforced another. Witness testimony supported forensic findings. Timelines matched documented movements. Independent evidence corroborated investigative conclusions. This layered approach became one of the prosecution's greatest strengths. It also reflected an important principle of criminal justice. Reliable convictions are built through corroborated evidence, not assumptions, not public opinion, not headlines. As preparations continued, journalists from across South Africa followed developments closely. The case had become a national story. Yet behind every newspaper article stood families whose grief continued long after public attention shifted elsewhere. For them, the approaching trial represented something deeply personal. Not revenge, not spectacle, but the possibility that the truth would finally be established in a court of law. Still, even as prosecutors finalized one of the country's largest criminal cases, some investigators remained troubled by unanswered questions. Could every known victim be linked with certainty? Had every crime connected to the investigation been identified? And why had the offender chosen to contact the media after remaining hidden for so long? Those questions would continue to be debated long after the verdict. But first, the evidence itself would have to be presented, piece by piece, witness by witness, until the court reached its decision. On 21 October 1996, the investigation entered its final and most public stage, the courtroom. For more than a year, detectives had worked across multiple crime scenes. Forensic specialists had analyzed evidence. Prosecutors had assembled one of the largest criminal cases in South African history. Now every conclusion would be tested before the Pretoria High Court. The accused, Moses Sithole, appeared before the court facing an indictment unlike almost any previously heard in democratic South Africa. The charges were extensive: 38 counts of murder, 40 counts of rape, 6 counts of robbery. Each charge represented an individual allegation. Each required proof. Each demanded careful examination by the court. The accused pleaded not guilty to all charges. That plea did not end the proceedings. It began them. From that moment onward, every element of the prosecution's case had to be established through admissible evidence. South Africa's justice system required more than public belief. It required proof beyond reasonable doubt. That standard protected both the integrity of the trial and the legitimacy of any eventual verdict. For months, the court heard testimony from investigators, forensic specialists, medical experts, and witnesses whose evidence helped reconstruct events spanning more than a year. Each witness described only the facts within their knowledge. No single person told the entire story. Instead, the evidence accumulated. A forensic report confirmed one finding. A witness supported another. Police records established timelines. Medical evidence reinforced investigative conclusions. Like individual threads woven together, the prosecution built a case that relied not on one dramatic revelation, but on the cumulative weight of evidence. Throughout the proceedings, prosecutors argued that the accused had systematically targeted women searching for employment, using false promises of work to gain their confidence before leading them to isolated locations. The defense challenged aspects of the prosecution's case, as is expected in any criminal trial. Witnesses were cross-examined. Evidence was questioned. Legal arguments were presented. This process was not a weakness of the justice system. It was one of its strengths. Justice requires evidence to withstand scrutiny. Only then can a verdict command public confidence. Beyond the legal arguments, the trial represented something else. For many families, it was the first time they heard a detailed reconstruction of what investigators believed had happened to their loved ones. Court proceedings can never restore a life. They cannot erase grief, but they can establish facts. They can identify responsibility, and they can provide a public record that history cannot easily rewrite. As testimony continued, journalists reported daily from the courtroom. South Africans followed developments through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television reports. Many had watched the investigation unfold from the first reports of unexplained disappearances. Now they watched the legal process determine whether investigators had identified the correct person. The proceedings lasted for more than a year, not because the facts were uncertain, but because the scale of the evidence demanded time. Every witness deserved to be heard. Every document required examination. Every legal argument had to be considered. The court could not afford haste. Not in a case of this magnitude. Then, in early December 1997, the proceedings reached their conclusion. After hearing months of evidence, Justice David Carstairs prepared to deliver judgment. The courtroom was silent. Families waited. Investigators waited. Journalists waited. The accused waited. The written judgment took approximately 3 hours to read. It reflected not only the seriousness of the allegations, but also the court's obligation to explain the reasoning behind its conclusions. When the reading ended, the court found Moses Sithole guilty on all counts before it. For the families, the verdict brought legal certainty. It could never undo the past, but it established responsibility through the judicial process. Still, one decision remained. The verdict determined guilt. The sentence would determine consequence. And what the court announced the following day would become one of the most widely remembered sentences in South African legal history. The verdict had been delivered, but one final responsibility remained: the sentence. On 5 December 1997, the Pretoria High Court reconvened. The courtroom was quieter than it had been during much of the trial. There were no new witnesses, no new forensic reports. The evidence had already been heard. Now the court had to decide how South African law should respond to crimes of this scale. Justice David Carstairs addressed the court. His remarks reflected both the seriousness of the offenses and the limits of the law as it existed in South Africa at the time. Only a few years earlier, the country's legal system had undergone a profound constitutional transformation. In 1995, the S. v. Makwanyane decision by the Constitutional Court of South Africa had declared the death penalty unconstitutional. That ruling fundamentally changed sentencing in South Africa. For the most serious crimes, judges could no longer impose capital punishment. Instead, they were required to apply the sentences available under the new constitutional framework. During sentencing, Justice Carstairs observed that had the death penalty still existed, this would have been a case in which it would likely have been considered. His comment reflected the court's assessment of the gravity of the offenses. It was not a sentence that could legally be imposed. The Constitution had already answered that question. The judge then imposed sentence. For each count of murder, 50 years imprisonment. For each count of rape, 12 years imprisonment. For each count of robbery, 5 years imprisonment. The court ordered that the sentences run consecutively, rather than at the same time. The combined total amounted to 2,410 years of imprisonment. It immediately became one of the longest prison sentences ever imposed by a South African court. The figure attracted international attention. Yet legal experts were quick to explain its purpose. No human being could ever serve thousands of years. The sentence was symbolic only in its arithmetic. Its practical effect was unmistakable. The court intended to ensure that the convicted man would remain in prison for the rest of his natural life. Under the parole framework applicable at the time, reports indicated that he would not become eligible for parole for centuries. In practical terms, release was never intended to be a realistic possibility. For many observers, the sentence represented more than punishment. It reflected the court's recognition of the number of victims. Each conviction carried its own sentence. Each victim was acknowledged individually.